Okay, so the title of my talk is Imagining Absolute Freedom. And I'm going to talk about each of those things, each of those words, imagining, absolute, and freedom, in reverse order. So, freedom. The word in the Buddhist language is moksha. You might find it in people's names sometimes. Moksha, freedom. And so what I'm really talking about here, when I'm talking about imagining absolute freedom, is awakening. What's spoken about in the Buddhist tradition is awakening or enlightenment. And freedom then is something which is not dependent on experience being a particular way. So it's a freedom of heart and mind that is able to be with whatever is going on. It's not dependent on conditions being a particular way. It's more fundamental, more profound, and more vast than that. So this is what the Buddhist tradition is saying is possible. It is possible to find a freedom that is that vast, that's not dependent on the ebb and flow of experience, the dukkha, the sukha, that flow, that river, whatever is going on. We can find a place, it's said, that is beyond that, that's able to hold all of that, and that is really true freedom. So that's what we're talking about. So, absolute. It's interesting, I had a little conversation with someone a few days ago where I said I was going to be giving this talk, and they questioned that word. They said they didn't like that word. And for them, that word kind of evoked a sense of striving and awakening being this massive thing that's a very long way away, and they didn't like that word absolute. So it was really helpful, actually. It made me reflect, why did I choose that word? What was I wanting with that? And we're all so different with words, some words, they'll really speak to some people. They'll be really resonant and meaningful and beautiful for one person, and for somebody else it really shuts them down and has certain connotations that are really unhelpful. So, there's always that invitation. If someone's using a word that isn't right for you, just see if you can translate it. So if that word absolute doesn't work for you, see if you can find something that does work for you. I would invite you. So maybe, we could talk about a radical freedom, or a vast freedom, a deep freedom, an unconditioned freedom. That's really what I was trying to evoke. I was trying to evoke the sense of something that's really not about the kind of everyday level of things. It's just beyond that. And that is something that I have sensed and tasted in my experience, and I'll talk about this more when I come to the imagining bit. That word has come to me as absolute, that it is possible to touch something, an experience that feels just completely beyond. Sometimes people in the tradition talk about awareness, and how awareness itself, whatever one is being aware of, but awareness itself can have this kind of quality of sort of absoluteness, of kind of being completely free of judgment, for example. So when we're just, it's going on all the time, there's this awareness of experience, through whichever sense gateway it's coming to us, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. And we can notice that awareness actually is completely without judgment. We're just going to wait for that. There's a level on which experience is just known. we might have all sorts of thoughts about it and judgments, but there's a level on which our experience is just known without judgment. And tuning to that, we can touch this dimension of the absolute, of the unconditioned. There's a lot more that could be said about that, and the qualities of awareness. But I want to mostly talk about this dimension of imagining, which kind of anticipates our theme for next year, actually, which is liberation through imagination. So, yeah, imagining. Imagining can be an imagining through any of the sense gateways. So we can imagine sound, we can imagine bodily experience, we can imagine the visual, we can imagine smell, we can imagine taste. I particularly want to talk about imagined bodily experience, because for me, in my practice, that's been a real doorway. And I think we're very different. So when you get ordained in our tradition, you get a what's called a sadhana practice, where you meditate with a particular Buddha figure, Buddha or Bodhisattva. And those practices are slightly different, and people do them in very different ways. So some people are very visual meditators, and for others, the images, maybe the images, Tara, Avalokiteshvara, they might really speak to you. To some people, they really evoke something, and for others, I'm kind of one of those. They don't really do so much. I have to find a way of imagining the awakened heart and mind more through the body. And what I found is really interesting about that is that it's, between imagining something and in the body and experiencing it, it's very close, actually. So I could invite you to do this right now. So imagine a feeling of openness in your hands. So what I find is that, you imagine something like that and it comes into being quite readily. I think maybe I've been practicing like this quite a while. It can take a while when we're new to practice to really connect with the body sense, to really feel through, sensation throughout the body. That can take a while. But when we get the hang of it, it can be very quick from the imagining to the becoming. So I've found imagining the awakened heart-mind, imagining the mind and heart of freedom to be really helpful. And I do that through Tara. So if anybody was there for the workshop on war this morning, she was brought in. She represents compassion and active compassion. So she's got one leg that is prepared for action and the other leg that's resourcing in meditation posture. And what I do when I'm connecting with imagining the heart-mind of Tara, the freedom of Tara, is that I imagine her hand on my lower back. And I imagine the quality of her consciousness through that imagined touch. And what I get a sense of is this complete equanimity. So she is unperturbed by what is going on. She's responding often to my suffering, but she is unperturbed by that suffering. She is completely sensitive to what's going on, and there's this sense of being really witnessed and seen and understood fully. It's like, yes, I get it. I get all the conditions that go back, as has been mentioned, go back through time and space. I get that this is happening, and I get that it's painful. But I'm not getting in a tiz about it. I'm not perturbed. This is still just this sense of openness, and also a sense of humour, of lightness around it. Not kind of agonizing in any way. We talk about sometimes, what's called an enemy of compassion, or near enemy of compassion, horrified anxiety. That can often be the response to someone's suffering. It makes us anxious. So there's a complete absence of that. That's what I can imagine in that touch. Yeah. So I can sort of feel that heart-mind through the imagined touch. And I bring that in. If I'm doing loving kindness practice and I'm wanting to connect with love for others, then I'll kind of imagine that hand, the quality of that hand, the quality of that love and that freedom. And I think it's very much in the humour or the kind of lightness. She can be attending, sensitive to what's going on, to the suffering, but at the same time, there's a playfulness, and that really for me, evokes a sense of freedom. And then what I try to do with this practice is the kind of edge for me that I don't find that easy, but I can feel like it's going to unfold more and more in the future. So I try to bring a sense of that hand into the whole body. So the gesture of that hand, I try to imagine that the whole body is embodying those qualities, that compassion and that freedom, that equanimity, that complete groundedness, that complete knowing of how things are, so that there's no tussling with the painful. There's no sense that it shouldn't be like that, because there's just the knowing that it is like that, independence on loads of conditions. And also this knowing of non-separateness, which is so much the root of freedom as it's seen in Buddhism, that, we're entangled and caught because we don't see things as they are. We don't see how we're embedded, deeply, deeply embedded in conditions. And when we do see that, we're released from that clinging to a sense of me here, separate. And we're just able to see others fully, respond to others fully. Yeah. So that is pretty much what I wanted to say about imagining absolute freedom, particularly through the body sense. Yeah.